Channel. My name is Lisa Elvin Stoltari, and I'm a genealogist and a passionate traveler. We are now featuring Les Filles à Marier, the marriageable girls. And this is the newest series in my Have Roots Will Travel YouTube channel. The other series that I've been really focusing on is Les Filles du Roi. So you can have a look at that as well. Today we're going to be featuring episode number 15 and getting to know her story a little bit better. Before we begin, however, I want to show you ways you can, support the channel. You can support it by being in the know, which it means that you would subscribe, like, and notify. And now we also have a new feature called Super Thanks that YouTube has instituted based on the fact that we reached a certain level of popularity. So I'm able to accept super thanks as well. So have a look at that. So without further ado, let's get started and get to know this fille à marier. So les filles à marier, as can be evidenced by the dates, 1634 to 1662. These came before les filles du roi. This 1634 was really the beginning of Quebec reclaiming. Remember, those of you who have looked at Quebec history, you know that it really began in 1608 and 1620. They came across and this and that. But really and truly, the 1634 is the beginning of the true expansion of New France as a real territory with families and all of that. And in 1629, New France was captured by the British and finally reclaimed by the French. So by 1634, they're ready to get started again. And so Les Filles à Marier was not an official program. It was just ladies who were contracted by a church or a fellow traveler or a family member. They came individually. So that is why they're not part of the larger group of Les Filles du Roi. The Filles du Roi was truly a contract they signed. And with all that would entail. Les Filles à Marier were a different breed. They were independent. They came one at a time or a couple at a time. They were not groups of 90 and 110 people on a boat. They were bravely going to truly a new world. Let's get to know our Filles à Marier of this week. So Anne Ledet is actually one of my great-grandmothers, and when I looked in my files, my best friend, that was also hers, and the boy next door. So Anne Ledet has definitely had far-reaching descendancy, to be sure. So let's get to know her story a little bit better. So Anne was born about 1631 in the small village or commune of Angoulême-sur-Mer, which means Angoulême on the sea, which is about 10 kilometers from the larger town of La Rochelle. The church where Anne might have been baptized was built in the 10th century and redone by the 15th century. You can see that magnificent door, that red door. Angoulême is a seaside community with many cultural and touristic, places. It's a spot. It's definitely a spot where you would go. It's part of the Nouvelle-Aquitaine, and it is found in the Département Charente-Maritime. So Anne would arrive in 1652, a very early arrival, to be sure. So the groom that she would select and who selected her, his name was Jean Neveu. He was born in 1625 in the commune of Saint-Georges de Montaigu. His parents are unknown. Saint-Georges de Montaigu is part of the Pays de la Loire region of France, and it is also part of the Département of Vendée. This is a very, very ancient town. It can be traced even back to the 6th century, and when they founded an abbey here as well. By the 11th century, it really was becoming a real place for a refuge, apparently. It was part of the Great Royal Road from Nantes to La Rochelle in the 18th century. So it played a pivotal part. The church there that Jean would have been baptized in is still standing, and we have a picture of what the place looks like with the church in the background. So that's kind of a neat thing. So he came to New France about 1645. So he was there for about 7 years. He was a mason, so he obviously had lots and lots of work as New France was building. They were married the 28th of January, 1653, in the chapel at Sillery. This was part of where they would eventually make their home. The boroughs of Quebec City, but for well over 3 centuries, it was its own independent city. In 2002, Sillery, along with other small cities, was amalgamated into the larger region of Quebec City. It was first established as Canada's first Indian reserve. It was named Saint Joseph, and the money for establishing the first settlement was provided by Noël Boulard de Sillery. Unfortunately, the native population fell victim to disease and other issues, and the reserve failed. The town was eventually named Sillery in honor of its benefactor, and become an important player in Quebec's lumber industry. And so you can see this museum here. This is part of the church that they would have been married in, but this is also a museum today where you can visit it, which I plan to do in my summer expedition to Quebec City. And so let's have a look at the family they created. So they would have 2 children. Barbe married Nicolas Sylvestre and had 15 children, 12 of whom made it to adulthood. Suzanne would marry Nicolas Pau and have 1 child. She then married Jean Devin and had 1 more child. Both her children survived. It was discovered that Jean had another wife in France, so now was found guilty of bigamy. He was expelled from New France. So we do not know when he died. We don't know what happened to him. But we do know that Anne Ledet was left alone in New France with 2 children, her marriage annulled, and what to do next. So the groom, the man who would rescue her, his name was Gilles Pinel, and he was born in 1635 in La Rochelle, France. His parents were Nicolas Pinel and Madeleine Marot, and he would have been baptized at Sainte Marguerite, the church that was part of that Protestant and Catholic combination, if you will. La Rochelle, the harbor, is a very famous one, and during the 15th century was probably the largest French harbor on the Atlantic coast, and it dealt with all that good stuff of wine, salt, and cheese. And the name La Rochelle means little rock. La Rochelle has one of the richest histories of all the towns of France, because it was really where the Knights of Templar began, and it's also where Eleanor married Henry Plantagenet in 1152, who ultimately became King of England as Henry II in 1154, thus making La Rochelle part of British rule, Plantagenet rule, until Louis VIII captured it in the siege of La Rochelle. And so, during the time that the British had it, the English had it, Henry had a castle built, the Vauclair Castle, which you can still see in the Place de Verzon, which would be an amazing thing. And from 1568 on, La Rochelle became a center for the Huguenots, which are the French Protestant. And this caused the real, battles, if you will. And all of the revolts that took. So your ancestors that came from La Rochelle would not necessarily have been Protestant, but certainly would have been exposed to the violence that was going on there. And also, some of them may have been expelled or escaped. So it's all part of the history and kind of the background of why they would have chosen to escape and go to New France to seek freedom to some extent. Now, the Pinel family is an interesting one because they actually came around 1650, around the time that Gilles and his twin brother, he's a twin, would come over with their mother. Their father had begun and was, a pioneer in the areas of Trois-Rivières for certain, and Quebec. And so he was already there when Anne would have had her situation. He was there ready, in a sense. And so they were actually married shortly after her first husband was, essentially the marriage was annulled. And so he was expelled. And so she would have found herself truly at wit's end. I suspect that there was some intervention on her behalf. to be able to connect the dots, if you will, and have her find a man to share her life with. So on the 2nd of September, 1657, they were married in Quebec City. So this began the new chapter of Anne's life, a remarkable twist of good fortune. So Catherine married Jean Proux and had 12 children, 10 of whom made it to adulthood. Françoise did not marry and died at the age of 43. Marie-Madeleine would marry Pierre Allard and have 8 children, all of whom would make it. She would then marry François Vandel and have 8 more children. 3 would make it. François Xavier would marry Louise Constantineau and have 10 children, 8 of whom would make it. Elisabeth Ursel would marry Michel Constantineau, the brother of her sister-in-law, and have 12 children, 8 of whom would make it. Guillaume would marry Madeleine Fauché, but did not have any children, as I can attest or have researched. Anne would marry Romain Dubuc and have 8 children, 6 of whom would make it. Nicolas would marry Anne Constantineau. This family, as you can see, has deep ties between these two families, and have 2 children. One would survive before his own early death at 24. Jean would marry Romaine Constantineau and have 2 children, one of whom would make it before his early death at 28. So I want to show you the 1666 census and 1667. A little bit different. We have Gilles Pinel, we have Anne, then in the 1666, and Françoise, Marie-Madeleine, François Xavier, and then all of a sudden Belle Neveu and Suzanne Neveu. So, and they note that their father is, I don't know, fille du Neveu. And so they are listed in the 1666, clearly not the daughters of Gilles Pinel. Then in the 1667, 1 year later, remember these girls are 12 and 10 years old. Gilles Pinel is now 33 years old. Interesting that he would suddenly become 33 as opposed to 21. But Anne Ledet, sa femme, 36. Catherine, 10. Then we have Françoise, Marie-Madeleine, François, Elisabeth, who was 15 months old. And then we have one type de bétail, it's a head of cattle, which is quite impressive, and 16 arpents à valeur. So he has between 14, probably 13 to 14 acres of land. Remember, the Pinels were there before his father had a great deal of land, and so this would have been part of his inheritance for sure, and certainly they would have had the means. So let's have a look at where they eventually settle. Would eventually settle at Neuville, and you can see by Neuville just a little bit south of Quebec City. It was founded in 1684, but it was actually founded as a parish, but it was actually granted as a seigneurie in 1653 by Jean de Lauzon to Jean Bourdon de Saint-Jean for his son, Jean-François Bourdon de Domburg, who was an engineer and also attorney general to the sovereign and just an all-around kind of Renaissance man. By 1680, however, the Domburg seigneurie was acquired by Nicolas Dupont de Neuville. Thereafter, it became known as Neuville. In 1679, the Saint François de Sales parish was formed. It became a civil parish in 1684. The place was also known as Pointe-aux-Trembles or Pointe-aux-Trembles, in reference to the point on which the church was built, which once was covered with aspen, which is the French word is tremble, and birch. So that's kind of that. You can see this actual picture of Neuville on the right is taken from Ile d'Orléans. Okay, just amazing picture. Love it. Can't wait to visit. And this is the church, Saint François de Sales, that exists today. Obviously has undergone a lot of renovation. And this clipping here I have is the 1681 census. Gilles Pinel, Anne, Enfant Françoise, who was 21, Elisabeth, 14, Guillaume, 13, Anne, 10, Nicolas, 7, Jean, 6. They have 2 guns, 4 bêtes à cornes, which is 4 goats, and 20 arpents à valeur. So about 16 to 18 acres of land. Gilles would die first at age 65 on January 15, 1700. He and Anne would have been married 43 years. Anne would only live another 11 months without him, being buried on December 14, 1700. Descendants from both her marriage the number would be 430, 261 from Gilles Pinel himself. Just amazing. For those of you who are wondering, I descend from Barbe Neveu, from the Neveu side, as does the boy next door. He also descends from the Pinel side. My best friend descends from the Pinel side as well. So it's just kind of amazing. Amazing. I can't wait to read up all your notes and all your comments. Here are some of the resources that I use. And I also want to point out one that on the last one, I don't think I mentioned it. Maple Stars and Stripes, the podcast. During the lockdown, the COVID, I discovered this and went absolutely bonkers over it. It taught me so much. The narrator and the owner of this website and podcast is Sandra Goodwin. One day I want to meet her because she really inspired me, and truly an amazing place to go. I've put the links to our website and the podcast and all that good stuff. So absolutely. One that I've been discovering of late is the French-Canadian genealogist. Love her work. Think that there's a lot of passion and love in there. And then my other resources are also listed for you to have a look at as well. And so ends episode 15. Truly an amazing ride she had. Anne was just amazing in terms of her, I don't know, just to be able to survive that, just the horror of knowing that you married a bigamist during that time, being, all of the, the scandal of it all, and being able to survive and keep thriving. Just an amazing woman, and I am grateful to be descended from her. And she inspires me, actually. When I discovered it was, mine, I was like, yeah, it's just amazing, amazing woman. So thank you to Anne for gracing our shores, for enduring all that she did. And we bless her memory and thank her for her contributions. Until I see you on episode 16, au revoir.